Good afternoon, world. Welcome back to the PG.biz podcast. It's post GDC 2023, and we thought we would catch up with some of the team members from Steel Media who were out in San Francisco to find out what the buzz was on the show floor. So we are welcoming back Mr. Chris James and Mr. Dave Bradley. Welcome home, gentlemen. How was GDC?
Peggy is also there. We're welcoming her.
My first, actually.
The hardest working women in showbiz.
Yeah, indeed. I thought GDC was back. I mean, we're just back from GDC. We'll be back over a week now, actually. But GDC was definitely back. I mean, we've obviously had our biggest show ever in London in January. But this is, I don't know if it's the biggest GDC ever, but it was certainly up there. It was about, I think they're talking about 28,000 registered attendees, plus the thousands more that don't buy tickets and hang around the hotels, which was where I spent a lot of my time at these shows. But yeah, and it was back. It felt buzzy. It felt the place to be. It felt like you needed another week to get around it all. And but yeah, I enjoy the show.
Yeah, Chris is right. I think we're looking at numbers like 28,000. I think they're saying, and compared to last year, which was just after the pandemic, and people were hesitant about going back to live events. I think we're potentially hearing that it was twice the size it was in 2022, which is very gratifying. I think this year as well, there were more international visitors there. For instance, there was a whole summit by Lightspeed Studios. Now, Lightspeed are part of Tencent, and although they have offices all over the world, including in America, they flew a lot of their team in from China as well, which I don't think we saw in 2022. So GDC is, again, the kind of place to get that sort of content as well.
Fantastic. And Peggy, you were there. You were across the show floor.
Yes, I was. In fact, I was doing a lot of interviews for Pocket Gamer. Going to be a lot of Q&As, a lot of features with just people in the industry studios we haven't heard from for a while. A lot of unsung heroes at GDC, but making a very strong show. And I'll have more of that. But another thing that made a very strong show at GDC, and I just want to hear Dave and Chris what you think, is also mobile. What were your impressions as well?
It should be about mobile. Mobile's over 50% in the industry, and I think there's a little bit of catch up there. Ironically, the whole industry is going through a little bit of flux at the moment, and mobile certainly no less than anything else, with the IDFA changes and the knock-on effects of all that.
For sure, definitely. And I saw some really interesting things happening with mobile. I had a play on the Mithril stand, who are finding a way to broadcast mobile onto TV. So, you could play your mobile phone games directly on the TV. And there are a number of really good mobile studios were present. Like I mentioned, Lightspeed, which is a Tencent studio, but they're the people who co-developed PUBG Mobile, for instance, which is a phenomenon. And they were there. Epic, of course, had one of the biggest stands in the expo area, of course, most famous for Fortnite. And at the show, they unveiled their Unreal editor for Fortnite creators, which is great. But of course, that has a mobile implementation as well. And Fortnite is big on mobile, so there's plenty of stuff on the Epic stand for mobile fans there. But to Chris's point, I'm with you, Peggy. I think I saw a lot of mobile projects, but generally there was a kind of a vibe around the show that the free-to-play mobile model that we've been so familiar with for years is maybe waning a little bit. The cost of user acquisition, particularly in this era of restricted data, is proving quite hard. And so one place where I didn't see quite so much mobile was the indie studios, where I think maybe they've been a little bit sort of chased out of that scene a little bit. For instance, on the Mix, the indie showcase, loads of really good indie projects there, but probably out of 2 floors of indie games, maybe only 2 mobile games there. And I can see that happening. So a lot of the talk at the show, I think, for me, and I don't know whether, Chris and Peggy, this was your impression as well, was that the old kind of free-to-play game where you then, monetize through, ads or in-app purchases or whatever, was struggling this year, and that people are, experimenting elsewhere. So maybe things like the subscription model with Apple Arcade and Netflix is going to have more of a, be more in people's minds this year.
Absolutely. It was a lot about subscriptions, and it was also a lot about, I don't know what actually you would call it, just trying to think about merchandising, right? So it was a lot about collectibles. We won't use NFT words. It was just like ownership of assets, and what can we do to extract more money out of that as part of the game experience? What are we going to do? Because the monetization models are different. I wouldn't say they're broken, but they've moved on.
I think this is reflected in a lot of the content that you're seeing on the pocketgamer.biz site, which is hybrid monetization. There's no one size fits all anymore. And more of the companies out there that are working within the mobile space, helping and supporting developers, it's all about using that data. It's all about, tracking and measuring the various business models that you're now expected to use. And I think that is having an impact on the smaller studios, the indie end of the market, because it's a specialized topic. And if you don't have somebody in-house who, kind of has that background, that knowledge base, you're not necessarily going to be able to compete effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the point you make about the subscriptions is definitely valid. I spoke to a lot of people, kind of one-to-one, sort of CEOs, like guys from Halfbrick, Super from Megacorp, sort of come to us, or people and they're all looking at different models. And I don't think anyone's going, oh, free-to-play is dead, or it's not going to still be a massive driver of revenue. But I think when it comes to starting new projects and looking ahead, I think there's more interest, excitement, and opportunity in new models, like whether it's a subscription or cross-platform, or maybe it is a Web3 game. As we do see subscription growth, that is good news for the indie community again, because it means that game quality, not monetization quality, becomes again the most prominent thing.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to kind of swerve away from the subject, but just as a segue from what you were saying there, and Peggy, you raised it as well about the ownership. People are avoiding using the term NFTs. I saw a couple of studios still talking about that. But it was interesting that one of the other kind of themes, if I may, from GDC, it seemed, it was that the Web3, the kind of blockchain game space, seems to have sort of breathed out a little bit, and some of the, as the kind of attention has gone away from it, and as people have, maybe some of the speculators have moved on after some of last year's kind of failures in this space, like the FTX exchange and things, with some of the pushback from the industry and some of the kind of chances, to put it mildly, have kind of moved away from that. Actually, what we've been left with at GDC was people working on blockchain games who actually know about games first. So I saw people who were developing mobile games and PC games who were from a games background, and then finding ways to monetize it with blockchain, rather than, I think, like a year ago at kind of GDC 2022, I was sort of seeing a lot of people who came from maybe like a decentralized finance background, kind of trying to figure out a way to enter games through blockchain, but didn't really know what made a good game. And so that was kind of heartening this year.
I think it's a really good point, Dave. And I think the fact that we are very clearly over the initial hump on the hype curve, and you're absolutely right. Once it becomes a sort of fundamental piece of the plumbing, as it were, in much the same way as free-to-play did, then we'll see a lot of companies getting on, innovating and producing things that potentially have some real value to players.
It was really, the game first, and spoke with companies, for example, Magic Eden, right? And the whole idea is we're going to build a home for Web3 games. It's like, a portal in a way that the game developers can be a part of, and the merchandise can be there. And it was the whole idea that this is a reset in many ways, to your point, Dave, as well, because it was interesting how many companies want to step up now and sort of assist with that new ecosystem, building this new ecosystem, talking about homes for Web3 games, talking about what the ecosystem needs, talking about ways to bring these games together. And I guess we're going to see something really interesting, which is almost like Game of Thrones for me, maybe Game of Phones. I don't know, where everyone's like, come over to my home for Web3 games, and come over to my home where we're going to have all the subscription games. And it's going to be interesting.
You're right. There's an absolute excitement about the space. And that's why we've got Blockchain Gamer. It's reanimated itself with the new editorial team coming in. So we hope to be part of the ecosystem. We hope to play a role both with Pocket Gamer and with Blockchain and with Beyond Games. We hope to play a role in that space and trying to educate and entertain and inform people.
He mentioned about Beyond Games, and just a hat tip, really, Dave. Excellent article with Guy Gadney, whom we interviewed. Remember, Brian, which was just, I think, amongst the top interviews, not even just on this podcast, but overall in the industry, just really, really solid, and sort of telling us about the future of storytelling and AI, which was, of course, another huge hot topic at GDC as well.
And AI, yeah, thank you. I'm glad you saw that interview. I had a good chance to chat with Guy, and of course, he was on the podcast. You've spoken to him, you know that he's very articulate on the subject of artificial intelligence. What I like about what Charisma.ai, his company, are doing is that they're very much looking at AI as a way to enable storytellers rather than replace them, which I think is what people are worried about in the creative industries, that AI is going to replace them. And this, we are in a time of change, and some of those fears, I think, may be well founded, but certainly Charisma.ai are not, and they use conversational AI and large language models to enable a new type of storytelling, and I think that what we're seeing with the way that AI is built into non-player characters in games is probably the death of the traditional dialogue tree, where you used to have 4 options where you speak to a character in a game and you've got to pick one thing. And now it looks very much like you can, you'll be able to interact very much more naturalistically with characters. But there are other companies there working on the AI side of things as well. It was another hot topic, as we found, in January at our own event. Lots of people talking about artificial intelligence as a way to enhance their storytelling and add to the game. And of course, the other big thing, forgive me, was you couldn't fail to notice was that VR was huge. And again, VR is another topic that we follow on Beyond Games and that we have done at previous events that we've run. And here at GDC again, I think VR was having a bit of a moment too. I played a number of interesting things. Atari were there with a game that they're publishing.
Resolution, our good friends, Mr. Tommy Palm and co, had quite a big sort of open booth with 4 or 5 games on display. There was a lot of VR, which is interesting. Again, it's something we back in 2016, maybe 7, we did a VR Connects, and we were that was again one of these technologies that had that acceleration of false store. And I remember that GDC back then had, everybody had was a VR developer, and then obviously the adoption has taken time. I think we're on a path towards that now. There's a lot of Quests out there. There's now these Pico devices. We have PlayStation VR, and then obviously the fruit sellers, our favourite fruit sellers, are going to be unleashing their version. Rumoredly, it's pretty much the worst kept secret at the moment that at WWDC in June we're going to be getting hands on with the Apple AR VR device, whatever it is, that might cost $3,000 and might change your life forever, or might not. So I think Dave's absolutely right. The kind of VR stroke AR kind of technology is having its day and quietly developing.
For me, that's the interesting thing, because as the sort of the one person who wasn't out in San Francisco, I wouldn't have suspected VR would maybe be having this renaissance, because we're not at the stage yet where we've got kind of mass market adoption. We're still at the point where, regardless of how many Meta headsets, how many PSVR headsets there are out there, it's still not kind of a mainstream audience. Has it become like the new cutting edge console? So there are sufficient numbers of gamers out there who are willing to pay for content that it's now building a viable market. I honestly thought we would be waiting for AR and for the Magic Leaps and the Microsofts and of course the Apples to hit the market before we really saw any kind of major movements or leaps forward.
Magic leaps forward, very good. I'm just looking actually how many VR headsets. I'm doing a cheeky consultant insight.
Doing a little research while we're live. I think one of the interesting things, of course, I think the price of the Meta Quest 2 was slashed, wasn't it? I think that helped put it in a number of people's hands.
Yeah, and then to be honest, someone else says 15.5 is a different report. So I think that sort of 15.5, 16.5 million. I mean, it's still small compared to, how many consoles and PCs and obviously mobiles are out there is in the billions, but it's growing.
So it's great to hear that it's actually making an impact, and we've had this resurgence within the games world.
Perfect segue. Talking about impact, that's it exactly. So we've counted them down. We talked about Web3. We also talked about subscriptions, so monetization models, hybrid, AI, VR, AR. These are the hot topics that defined what we saw at GDC. Now we have Seattle right around the corner, and we have you here, Dave and Chris. What are we going to see in Seattle?
That's interesting. So we're looking forward to PGC Seattle is only in a couple of months' time. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I did right after GDC, since I was there on the West Coast, was I flew up to Seattle for a week and spent some time visiting studios up there and meeting up with our friends at Seattle Indies and some of the bigger studios, and that was very interesting and illuminating. And I think that as well as doing what we always do at our Pocket Gamer Connects events, bringing knowledge sharing and networking opportunities to one place. The thing that the industry needs at the moment, I think, are basically recruitment is a big thing. So a lot of people are looking for work at the moment. That's the nature of the industry. I mean, that's always the case. We do careers activity at all our events, but particularly I think at the moment there's a need for that. So we're going to have a recruitment fair on day 2 of our event. That's going to be the 17th of May. And then we're also supporting the indies. And again, we always support the indies. But there's a lot of indie studios in Seattle particularly. It's been very strong for that. And this is an interesting time for indies generally. So we're going to have an indie expo area at PGC Seattle, which is twice the size of last year.
Wow.
We're doubling the size of the tables in the expo area.
We will have a big Web3 contingent as well, but Seattle has a lot of Web3 studios in and around that vicinity. We'll be covering all the latest mobile games trends and general global trends and opportunities as well. Seattle, in terms of flavour, is a bit more kind of cross industry probably than even London. I mean, London by its scale has everything in it, but Seattle is more focusedly a bit cross platform. We will also be doing our regular investment connection activities. A lot of people at the moment looking for either publishers or investors. The investment market, still a lot of money out there to be deployed, has slowed down a bit, but there is a lot of investment out there waiting to find a home and companies looking for their startup capital or second round funding, and we're going to be helping that with our investor connector stuff as well. So a lot of different themes there. If you're in the games industry, you should come to Seattle. It's a nice place as well, isn't it? It's a nice part of the world. And then we're going to do more after that, aren't we? We've got a month before we go to Dubai.
Oh, wow.
We Dubai in June.
That's
going to be tasty.
That came out of nowhere.
That came out of nowhere, didn't it? Well, I had been we're working with the authorities out there. We're working with the local sort of trade and tourism board. And yeah, that's an event that they want to grow their own version of E3 stroke Gamescom out there, and we're going to try and help on the B2B side. So we're going out there. So that's just starting to announce speakers and early sponsors for that. And then in July, Toronto. But yeah, so there's a lot of shows coming up, but Seattle is first and foremost.
I was looking at Toronto. They already reached out to me to moderate a couple sessions. And I was looking at Dubai. I thought, you know what, guys?
Dubai, we'll take you around the world. This is around the world in 80 weeks or 80 days. It could literally be around the world in 80 days if we keep up expanding these events.
This year, there'll be something in our calendar every single month. And that might not necessarily be a whole Pocket Gamer Connects, but we're also, for instance, announced we're going to be doing 2 fringe events in August alongside Gamescom, for instance. And so pretty much every month.
October has a window at the moment. So,
Scottish Games Week 2023 is back. So that's just kind of landed. So, we should have a chat.
The Mobile Games Awards,
oh my God,
which is later this month. We'll be announcing the 2023 Mobile Games Awards at BAFTA in London, BAFTA 195 Piccadilly in London. Chris will be on stage, suited and booted, handing out the gongs for this year's mobile games industry prizes. So that's just around the corner. At the time of recording this, therethere's still just a few days left for people to vote. That actually closes very soon.
We've had over 12,000 industry votes so far, which for an industry awards is pretty phenomenal, I think. Previously did it with like 100 kind of anonymous judges, and that was okay. But we just thought, well, why don't we just open this up? And we have this year. And yeah, people have engaged, so people do care. So there are people hopefully coming along to celebrate that, and hopefully to celebrate whether or not I can get into my suit, which is going to be worth coming along for, because to be fair, it hasn't got bigger, and I have, so that could be worth watching.
Yeah, Chris will be the host with the most, and we've got 23 categories. I want to say we're revealing.
That's true. Yeah, no, it's yet again we've failed to get any real presenting talent, and so it will be me living out my frustrated attempts at being a stand-up comedian.
You say that, but IDFA is a growing problem, so it's only a matter of time before, Michael McIntyre's doing a whole 15 minutes on it.
Have a game show. Michael McIntyre's mobile UA wheel or something.
Send to all anonymously or something like that, correct?
Who's gonna get their game featured this week? Oh dear. Like, you could do send to all, where that's the UA process. It's like basically You click a button. If you get your advert sent to everybody in Michael McIntyre's kind of contact book, that could be the new strategy. Are you watching this?
Mentioned him here in the show. Now he'll be tuning in.
I know. It's a free plug for McIntyre. By God, he'll almost certainly not be at ours, but we'll see. He might turn up.
Well, you never know. It's like he might be free that evening. He might have a tuxedo.
Exactly.
So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. The almighty reach of this podcast is yet to be ascertained. So, well, there we go. There's the plug section done. Pretty comprehensively too.
And that's why we do this, Brian, because it is such a blast to co-host this show, isn't it?
It's always a joy. Always an absolute joy
Indeed.
to talk to you. And having you guys on has just it's been the icing on the cake.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Always a
We'll do
pleasure.
another one after the next. Do another one after the next show. We'll make it a tradition after every major cool show conference. We get together.
Right.
We talk about it again.
Post PGC, looking forward to
That's
it.
great.
Fantastic.
There you go. PGC's next.
It's a deal.
You're on.
So, Mr. Chris James, Mr. David Bradley, thank you so much for joining us. And Peggy,
Brian,
always a
thank you.
pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Brian. Thanks so much. This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Salz, and that's a wrap until next week.